I'm Brian Lilly. Parliament doesn't matter. That is the topic of tonight's byline. It's a big political day in Ottawa. We had a cabinet shuffle. The players remain the same, but they've switched jobs. Jason Kenney moves from employment to defense. Rob Nicholson moves from defense to foreign affairs. And Pierre Poilievre, well, he gets an upgrade to employment minister to replace Kenney. Like I said, same players, different chairs. The song remains the same. The government policy is not about to change. So while it's fascinating for political watchers, it actually doesn't matter too much. Then we have Justin Trudeau's bombshell news. He's bragging about getting an MP the Conservatives had barred from running in the next election because of funny business she and her on-again, off-again boyfriend, fiancé, Dimitri Soudis, were involved in.
She wanted to be her community's voice in Ottawa, not the Prime Minister's voice in her community. She has shown passion and commitment to her constituents, both as a city councillor and as an MP, and in her work as a parliamentary secretary. But she has also seen her work restrained by a party focused on the politics of meanness and division.
Oh, Justin, here's a hint. When your opponents are kicking someone out for breaking the rules, maybe that's a floor crosser you don't want. Why is Miss Adams, a former parliamentary secretary of Health and Veterans Affairs, now joining the Liberals? Here's what she said.
There is a mean-spiritedness and divisiveness in the leadership approach, in how we approach governing. And I guess I'm having a tough time, you'll excuse me with the pronouns here, but the way that they govern. When it comes to specifics like income splitting, I think that's one of the easiest examples. It is simply taking one group of Canadians, pitting them against another, forcing the middle class to pay for what amounts to a rather substantial tax cut to the wealthiest families in Canada.
Now, that's what she says now. It's not what she said before. Before she was campaigning for it, ran ads from her own campaign in favor of income splitting. But none of that matters because Parliament doesn't matter. We were reminded of that on Friday with not one, but two decisions. Of course, you know about the assisted suicide ruling, the one that not only overturned settled Supreme Court precedent, but also repeatedly stated will of Parliament. But did you know about the decision released by the federal court that said covering up your face with a niqab is constitutionally protected while taking the oath of citizenship? That decision was handed down by Justice Kenneth Boswell on Friday. It came about after a woman from Pakistan who immigrated to Canada in 2008 decided she wanted to become a citizen. According to the Toronto Star, she will not show her face in public if there are men present. So even the offer for her to sit in the front row surrounded by women and take her oath was rejected because she said the citizenship judge might be a man or there could be photographers present. So in her view, if she wants to be a Canadian citizen, it should be Canada that should change, not her. From the ruling, to the extent that the policy interferes with a citizenship judge's duty to allow candidates for citizenship the greatest possible freedom in the religious solemnization or the solemn affirmation of the oath, it is unlawful. That's from Justice Boswell. Now, Boswell was striking down a policy, not a law, but a policy implemented by Minister Kenney when he was in charge of immigration. Kenney heard about people being sworn in as Canadian citizens with their faces covered and said he wanted that to end. He said we needed to know who was actually taking the oath. And I agree with that. I think most Canadians would agree. You want to walk down the street with your face covered, knock yourself out. I don't like it. It makes me uncomfortable to be surrounded by people covering their faces for reasons other than, say, the protection from the harsh weather we're having here in Ottawa. But hey, go nuts, enjoy. I'm not going to stop you. But when you want to take the oath of citizenship, you want to vote, you want to get on an airplane, you want to testify against someone in a criminal court, well, you damn well show your face. You change. Canada does not. Except, of course, we know that's not the case. We already have exemptions made for veiled Muslim women to vote across Canada, and the Supreme Court ruled that an accused no longer necessarily has the right to face their accuser in an open court if the accuser is a Muslim ruling. That ruling overturned centuries of legal precedent. Now we have Justice Boswell on the niqab ban at citizenship ceremonies. The ban didn't say no one could wear it, just that the judge administering the oath needed to see the would-be citizen's face. Well, that's too much for Justice Boswell, who also wrote, the policy in this case could be dissuading women who wear a niqab from even applying for citizenship in such circumstances. A direct challenge to the policy is appropriate. Like I said, Parliament doesn't matter. The minister in charge of the citizenship process made the policy, the courts overturned it. Parliament called for uncovered faces at voting booths. Elections Canada ignored it. Why do they even bother? Why not just let courts and bureaucrats make all the decisions and the politicians can just be dancing clowns for our enjoyment? The assisted suicide ruling is another cause for concern. Let me say this, even if you support the idea of assisted suicide, you should be worried about how this decision came about. The Supreme Court overturned not only the law, but their own established precedent. There is a practice in law in the court system called stare deci. Maybe I'm not saying it right, but it does mean stand by the decision. Courts are supposed to look to precedent, abide by precedent, not overturn them. Now, the court ruled in 1993 in the Rodriguez case in favor of keeping the law on the books. Now they've overturned it, and they've also ignored the will of Parliament, which has voted 6 times against legalizing assisted suicide since 1993. The most recent vote, 2010, when just 59 MPs, mostly Bloc Québécois, with a small handful of Conservatives, Liberals, and New Democrats voting in favor of legalizing assisted suicide, versus the 228 MPs, including the majority of the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the New Democrats, including the late Jack Layton, all voting against it. But now the courts have struck down the law and their own decision. But they have asked Parliament to come up with rules to give guidance on assisted suicide. Why? So they can just strike them down again when they change their minds? As I said, even if you support the outcome, the process should bother you. We're heading to an election later this year. It'll be the 7th federal election that I've covered. And with each election, Parliament seems to matter less and less because the appointed people, especially the ones in the robes, think they know better than the people's representatives. And that's the byline.
I saw actually a woman wearing a veil, presumably a woman, wearing a veil on a Sun News report. So they just showed up at a ceremony and they saw this happening. So the point is, this is not like once or twice a year. This is happening with sufficient frequency that I think it really does undermine the integrity of the oath, and that's why we're making this clarification today.
Tonight's top story, a stunning case of judicial activism. It's heavily overshadowed by the assisted suicide ruling, but as I just said, the Federal Court of Canada has ruled that new citizens do not have to remove a veil that covers their faith while reciting the oath of citizenship. This effectively means new Canadians who wear niqabs can keep them on while pledging allegiance to the Great White North. That policy, originally enacted by then Immigration Minister Jason Kenney in 2011, now considered unlawful. Boris Patensky is a criminal lawyer based in Toronto. He joins me now. Mr. Patensky, your thoughts on this? I see this as judicial activism. You see this as upholding the Charter.
Well, Brian, thanks for having me on, first of all. It's great to be here. I do see this as the court's role to rule on Charter issues that arise from time to time. This is just one example. Now, I fully understand that people in this country will disagree on the outcome of this decision, but this is exactly what our legislative predecessors envisioned when they created the Charter. It's the court's role to oversee any legislative acts and to ensure that whatever our government chooses to do passes constitutional muster.
What Charter provision is being infringed? You know, I'm a big believer in upholding fundamental rights and freedoms, and in fact, quite often it's the courts that trample them or the police that trample them, and I scream about that. But what Charter provision is being infringed by saying, you want to become a citizen, we need to see your face, we need to know who you are?
Well, that's a fair question. So there's the balancing of our right to ensure that the citizenship oath, means something against the rights of the individual to her religious freedoms. Presumably, this case is cast as this woman's fundamental religious beliefs that she must wear the niqab in all public appearances. I understand that she was prepared to remove the niqab for the purpose of having her identity confirmed, but otherwise was not prepared to remove the niqab for the purpose of taking the citizenship oath. And
I said in my monologue that if you come to Canada, you change, not Canada changes.
Right.
Let me just point this out. Muslim women that go on the Hajj to Mecca are not allowed to wear the niqab. That going to Mecca is it's actually one of the tenets of Islam. It's one of the things you must do to be considered a good Muslim. You have to go on the Hajj at some point in your life. They're not allowed to wear the niqab there. So they must wear it in Canada. They cannot show their face to a man who is going to allow them to become a Canadian citizen by taking the oath, but they can't wear it at the Hajj? That makes no sense to me.
Well, fair enough, and I respect that opposing argument. I don't know whether this argument was actually made during the time of the hearing. And this hearing is not a final hearing. The government has the right to appeal to the Federal Court of Appeal and even to the Supreme Court of Canada if it chooses to do so. So this may not be the end of the legal journey for this issue. But having said that, as I understand it, they are prepared to have a process where a female official verifies the woman's identification to make sure that she's the person she claims to be. And thereafter, the only real issue is whether you're wearing the veil for the purpose of the oath. And it's not fair for me as a non-Muslim male to comment about the reality or whether the veracity of another woman's, a Muslim woman's, personal religious beliefs. I take for the purpose of this discussion that those beliefs are validly held, and they're not just being brought for the sake of academic argument.
Well, it's not an academic argument where the one place you must visit as a Muslim forbids wearing that, but she's going to say that there's no possible way that she could take it off. Well, it just doesn't hold water. And I don't think the government should be getting involved in saying you can never wear it. Look, I'm not saying that we need to go the route of France and ban these things. Right. But if your religion says you must go to Mecca, Mecca does not allow this, and they go, well, you can't say Canada has to have different rules for Muslims than Saudi Arabia.
Well, Brian, I don't know that the situations are exactly the same. I don't have enough knowledge about Muslim customs outside of Canada to be able to speak eloquently about that. My point simply is this. In a courtroom setting where there's an accuser, an accused person, a defendant, the judge has the discretion to order a Muslim witness to remove the niqab because a person's appearance when testifying in court, their facial reactions, their demeanor, all those are part of their evidence and they're important. When you're given the oath, other than verifying your identity, I'm not sure why it's important for us to be able to see your face. If we confirm you are who you are, then apart from that, we presume that you mean just the same whether your face is covered while taking a citizenship oath as when it's uncovered. And if it really has true religious significance, I believe that we should honor that. But if there is no religious significance, actually, that's a completely different ballgame. We shouldn't create religious significance for somebody when there isn't any. And your point may very well be right.
All right. Mr. Potenski, thanks so much. We'll